making the invisible visible, black women 365 days of the year. Each day will spotlight a remarkable woman whose story has shaped black, British or global diasporic history, women whose achievements are too often overlooked. Through these daily short films, we create a living, breathing archive of leadership, creativity, resistance and legacy. Let's begin.
Right, well, I'm Leona Vaughn. I've worked for over 30 years in social justice and human rights, a lot of that time on race equality. I try to always think, how am I leaving this place better than I found it? Whether that's thinking about the world or thinking about my workplace, that's kind of like what drives me. I'm a social scientist, so obviously I'm always going to ask questions. And those questions are really what drive my practice, in terms of curiosity, like why are things like this? What is causing inequality or harm? How do we change this? And also, how can we have a good time doing it, which sometimes is not always uppermost in your mind when you're dealing with the type of work that I do. So I'd like to think that I make change in the world whenever or wherever I can. I try to do it with a sprinkling of joy and a good dollop of humanity, really. So I've done this work in loads of different settings, in charities, in the civil service. I worked for the Crown Prosecution Service, within universities. And I'd say that every day for me in the workplace is different, really, but very much focused on discovery, on learning. And they're the things that I love. I love that is part of my work. And I think particularly as a black woman in these spaces, and especially as a black Scouser, you may have recognised the accent, with all the stereotypes that are piled upon us, I'm really very intentional in acknowledging the privilege that it is to get into these spaces that many others have not gotten into. Because of that, I'm very intentional in making sure that I hold the door open behind me for others to get in here too. So when I was working at the Crown Prosecution Service, I set up the first ever programme to increase the number of black prosecutors in the UK, following the murder of Anthony Walker in 2005. So, I'm not a lawyer, but I wanted to make change in that sector. And, I love doing that. I love bringing people together who have skills and expertise that are different to mine, including creatives and artists and activists in my current work at the university. But I love bringing that diversity of people with all of those different skills and expertise to see what we can co-create. So I would say I come from, in my family, a long line of very brave and rebellious working class women, which has definitely shaped me. My mum definitely has to take a lot of the credit for shaping me. She often reminded us when we were young, never think that you're above anyone else, but also know that you're never beneath anybody else as well, which was really powerful. And for me, became like quite a touchstone in the way that I work. My mum was a mixed heritage woman who was outspoken in her beliefs on equal rights, who was against apartheid, was against racism, colonialism, spoke up for Ireland, spoke up for South Africa, spoke up for Palestine, at a time when probably it wasn't that easy to do that. And so for me, she was fearless. And like I say, she came from a long line of fearless women. And I think that all of those women in my life have been very inspirational to me in the work that I do. Black women are often held up to this strong black woman standard, which often means that we don't get to be vulnerable in lots of spaces, or that we don't get the support that we need. And I love it when people, both acknowledge my work, but also stop and ask me, what do you need? Like, what do you need, Leona? How can we help you? And to be honest, I never knew or understood how to respond, or why I didn't know how to respond. But as I've gotten older, I realised that it's actually because I'm not used to asking for any help. And I'm also just really mindful of asking, other sisters in this space, like, what do you need? I see you doing your thing, I see you doing your work, but I know the price that it carries. So what do you need to make it easier? And I wish more people asked us that. So hopefully if I model it, others will follow it. So as I've gotten older, I've learned to see things differently as, what is it that makes things a win? Rather than thinking about the big, huge things, the massive change that can feel like it's just so impossible or overwhelming. Like, what are the small things, the small moments that I can celebrate? So, even when someone tells me, oh, I applied for that job or that funding that you shared and I was successful, I take that as a win. I celebrate it all. And I try and do this on a regular, and I've got to say that also saying no to work, especially emotionally exhausting work, on a regular with no qualification as to why I'm saying no, is also part of how I do self-care these days, because, it can feel like a responsibility to always say yes. I do that as self-care, but that gives me joy to say no, I have to be honest. And I get joy from a good night's sleep, and I get joy from dancing with my kids, and I get joy from seeing my plants grow, which doesn't happen often because my kids call my collection of plants the plant cemetery. But I get joy from when they actually survive. I get joy. I get joy from walks in the park. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to look far to find the joy. But you do have to be intentional, I think, to always think about that.
Thank you for joining us for today's story. Making the Invisible Visible is our commitment to ensuring that Black women's histories and contributions are recognised, valued and kept in daily circulation. Across 2026, we will continue to share these powerful narratives, 365 days of impact, brilliance and inspiration. Stay connected, join the conversation, and help us champion the women whose journeys continue to shape our world. I'm Paulette Brooks, and I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow for the next story.